A tree that bleeds when you cut it. Not metaphorically, literally. Dark red liquid seeps from the wound, and it looks enough like blood that the first instinct is to step back. This is Pterocarpus angolensis, the Bloodwood tree, and it has been doing this for millions of years across southern Africa. The compound it releases is called dracorubine, a tannin-rich resin that communities in the region have used for generations as a wound sealant, an anti-inflammatory, and a treatment for skin conditions. The science confirms the chemistry. The science does not fully explain why a tree needs to look like it is dying to survive. That tension between what we can measure and what we cannot yet categorize is what makes Africa unlike any other place on Earth. This is the first of 13 locations, organisms, and phenomena that don't just surprise you, they make you reconsider what a living world is allowed to look like. The list includes birds whose anatomy reads like a draft evolution never finished, fungi that override the nervous systems of living insects and steer them toward their own destruction, a cave on the slopes of Mount Elgon where elephants have carved tunnels through solid rock searching for salt, and where researchers have identified conditions favorable to Ebola and Marburg viral reservoirs. It includes a migration of 10 million bats over Zambia that turns daylight into something else entirely, and a ghost town in the Namib that the desert has been quietly reclaiming for decades. The Bloodwood tree is the opening. It is the simplest version of the argument that Africa operates under a different set of rules. Not more dangerous rules, though some of these 13 can kill. Different rules. Rules that were written before humans arrived and have not been revised on our behalf. The next 12 entries are evidence of the same thing. And by the end, the question is not whether Africa is strange. The question is whether we were ever equipped to understand it. Number 13 on our list is a tree that bleeds. Not as a figure of speech, as a biological fact. Pterocarpus angolensis grows across the savannas and open woodlands of southern Africa, Angola, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, the northern reaches of South Africa. It looks, at a distance, like dozens of other trees in that landscape. Broad canopy, dry bark, the kind of silhouette you might pass without a second thought. But cut into that bark, and something stops you cold. A dark red resin wells up from the wound, thick and slow, the colour of blood that has already begun to dry. The resemblance is not vague or poetic. It is precise enough that early European explorers, encountering this tree for the first time, reportedly stood there, genuinely unsure of what they were looking at. The chemistry behind it is well understood now. That red resin is a concentrated mix of phenolic compounds, primarily pterocarpine and related flavonoids. These molecules do serious biological work. They are powerfully antiseptic and antifungal, which is why the heartwood of this tree resists termites and rot with unusual stubbornness, even in the heat and humidity of the African wet season. The wood itself is dense and warm-toned, a deep reddish-brown that craftsmen have prized for centuries, used in furniture, drums, canoes, ceremonial objects. Among Bantu-speaking peoples, the resin was medicine, applied to wounds, used to treat skin conditions, incorporated into rituals centered on blood, vitality, and fertility. The bleeding was not a curiosity to be explained away. It was a sign, a living tree that could mirror human suffering, that carried something vital just beneath its surface. Today, Pterocarpus angolensis is under pressure. It grows slowly. Logging has outpaced recovery across much of its range. Decades of regrowth can be lost in an afternoon. A tree that bleeds, and is now running out of time to do so. Number 12 is stranger still. The Marabou stalk is, by almost any measure, revolting, and that is precisely why it keeps entire ecosystems alive. Number 12 on our journey is Leptoptylos crumenifer, a bird that stands up to 1.5 meters tall and stretches nearly 3 meters from wingtip to wingtip, making it one of the largest flying birds on the African continent. Its head and neck are almost entirely bare, wrinkled, pinkish-red skin scattered with irregular blotches, utterly without feathers. Beneath the bill hangs a pendulous pink air sac connected to the respiratory system, its precise functions still debated, likely involved in thermoregulation and courtship display. When threatened or aroused, the Marabou snaps its bill halves together in rapid, rhythmic succession, producing a dry, mechanical clatter that carries across dozens of meters. Not a call. Not a song. A signal, stripped of everything but function. The reason for all that bare skin is straightforward once you understand what this bird does for a living. A scavenger that plunges its head deep into a rotting carcass cannot afford to maintain plumage in those places. Evolution made the calculation quietly and without sentiment. Remove the feathers, simplify the cleanup. The Marabou circles above the rubbish dumps of Kampala and Addis Ababa alongside vultures, stands motionless at the edges of shallow water, waiting for fish, and routinely steals prey from other birds with no apparent hesitation. Urban populations across Uganda, Ethiopia, and Kenya have grown noticeably over recent decades, but strip away the appearance, and what remains is a sanitation system of remarkable efficiency. The marabou's stomach acid neutralizes anthrax spores and botulism pathogens that would kill most other animals outright. Carcasses vanish. Contamination does not spread. Beauty, it turns out, was never part of the brief. What comes next on our list occupies the opposite end of that spectrum, a place where beauty and death share exactly the same coordinates. People swim here voluntarily. They approach the edge on purpose. They lean over and look down, more than 100 meters straight down, with nothing between them and the rocks below, except a submerged ledge of stone they cannot see. This is Devil's Pool, ranked number 11 among the world's most extreme natural sites, and it exists because of a geological accident that happens to align almost perfectly with human curiosity and poor risk perception. The pool sits at the very lip of Victoria Falls, on the Zambian side of the border that splits the Zambezi River's drop between Zambia and Zimbabwe. The falls themselves are a spectacle of disproportionate scale. The roar carries for dozens of kilometers. The mist column rises high enough to be visible from across the border, and the local Tonga people named it Mosi Oatanya, the smoke that thunders, long before any outside world took notice. What makes Devil's Pool possible is a natural rock barrier just below the water's surface, which catches and holds water in a pool of several meters before the edge. Between roughly September and December, when the Zambezi runs low during dry season, that barrier holds. The pool behaves like a pool. Guides bring tourists here. People float at the rim and photograph the void beneath them. But the margin is entirely defined by water level. When the rains come and the river rises, the rock disappears under the current, and Devil's Pool ceases to exist as a contained space. It simply becomes part of the waterfall. Several people have died here. Exact numbers are contested. Official figures remain deliberately vague. What remains consistent is the cognitive dissonance the place produces. Calm blue water, human bodies, bright equatorial light, and immediately beyond, a roaring abyss. It is simultaneously one of the most photographed and one of the most dangerous natural attractions on the African continent. But the Zambezi does not reserve its dangers for this single cliff edge. A fish that cannot close its mouth. Not because of injury or deformity, but because its teeth are simply too large to fit inside. That is the Goliath tigerfish, Hydrocynus Goliath, number 10 on our countdown. And that anatomical detail tells you almost everything you need to know about what this animal is built for. 32 teeth line its jaws, each one comparable in size to those of a great white shark. They protrude outward even when the mouth is shut, giving the fish the permanent expression of something that evolution decided should never look approachable. The reason those teeth need to be that large comes down to prey. The Goliath tigerfish hunts aggressively and takes on targets roughly half its own body size, including large fish species that most predators would leave alone. Adults grow to around 1.5 meters and exceed 50 kilograms, making this the largest member of the Karasin family, the same family that includes piranhas, though the Goliath operates on an entirely different scale. Its territory is the Congo River, which compounds everything. The Congo is among the deepest and fastest rivers on Earth. Turbulence and current velocities in much of its length prevent divers from working safely, meaning vast stretches of the riverbed remain effectively uncharted. The Goliath does not merely tolerate those conditions, it exploits them. Murky water and violent currents are cover, not obstacles. Local fishermen working the Congo Basin have reported attacks on humans, though confirmed documentation remains limited. What is well established is that catching one requires steel wire leaders. Standard fishing line is severed immediately. Those who target the species deliberately describe the fight on the line as unlike anything else in freshwater fishing. A silver-scaled, torpedo-shaped body built for one thing. In the unexplored depths of an unexplorable river, that is more than enough. Our next entry trades the African river system for the high plateaus of Ethiopia, where a very different kind of extreme physiology has evolved just as ruthlessly. The animal that takes 9th place grazes. Not metaphorically, it literally grazes, like a sheep, like a goat, spending the better part of every day on all fours, fingers combing through grass stems at elevations between 2,000 and 4,500 meters. The Gelada, Therapithecus gelada, is the only primate on Earth that subsists almost entirely on grass, and it does so exclusively in the Ethiopian highlands. There is no other population, no secondary range, no backup habitat. This is the one place, and it is enough, because the highland plateau stretches wide and cold and bright above the clouds. The grass diet explains the four-legged posture, but it also explains something stranger, the chest patch. Most primates signal status and reproductive condition through the colour of their hindquarters. The Gelada cannot do that efficiently while seated in tall grass, so evolution relocated the signal to the front. The bare skin on the chest runs a deep scarlet, almost arterial in its redness. In males, the shape suggests something between a burn and a bruise. Under stress or arousal, the patch engorges, the colour deepens, and rows of small white vesicles, called pearls, emerge along its margins. The message is the same as a red rump. The address changed. What no adaptation prepared anyone for is the lip flip. A gelada can curl its upper lip fully outward, bearing gums and oversized canines in a threat display that ethologists have studied, and that no description quite prepares you to see. The motion is sudden, almost stagey, performed by an animal with hands shaped like yours and eyes that do not look away. Herds run from dozens to several hundred individuals. Their vocalizations, rolling across cliff edges in layered, rhythmic sequences, have been compared structurally to human speech more than those of any other primate. The gelada does not attack people. What it does is look at you with complete attention and then turn its lip inside out. From this creature that grazes like livestock and unsettles like something else entirely, we descend. Off the plateau, past the clouds, down into water so pressurized it shapes stone into blades. The stone doesn't cut you because you fell, it cuts you because you touched it. That distinction matters more than it sounds when you're standing inside Tsingy de Bemaraha. Number 8 on our list, a plateau in western Madagascar where the rock itself is the hazard. Not the height, not the terrain, not the weather, the rock. What covers over 1,500 square kilometers here is not a mountain range or a canyon system. It is a field of blades. Thousands of sharp limestone pinnacles, some rising to 120 meters, pack the landscape so densely that movement through them is less like hiking and more like negotiating a trap. Scientific expeditions have documented the toll with clinical precision. Steel cables ground through within hours of contact, heavy-duty gloves failing before a single day was done, thick-soled boots worn to uselessness after just a few crossings. Dense fabric offered no reliable protection. The rock left deep cuts regardless. The reason these formations exist at all comes down to a process playing out over millions of years. Tropical rainfall, seeping through limestone, doesn't dissolve it evenly. It follows the fractures, the weaknesses, the lines of least resistance. Hard rock survived, softer rock vanished. What remained were vertical ridges with edges sharper than a well-honed knife. The local population named the place with characteristic accuracy. Tsingy translates roughly as the place where you cannot walk barefoot. It is not a metaphor. The paradox at the heart of Tsingy is that this same impassability shelters an entire world. Lemurs, birds, and plant species found nowhere else on Earth have evolved here in effective isolation, developing adaptations suited to life among cutting peaks. The barrier that makes the plateau lethal to outsiders is the precise condition that allowed its endemic life to thrive undisturbed. UNESCO added Tsingy de Bemaraha to its World Heritage List in 1990. Tourist access exists only along suspension bridges and specially prepared routes. The vast majority of the plateau has never been fully explored, not for lack of scientific motivation, but because the stone itself remains the obstacle it has always been. Tsingy is a static threat, locked in place for geological ages. The next location on our list operates on entirely different terms. It moves, it breathes, and its scale is large enough to erase the sky. The largest mammal migration on Earth is not the wildebeest crossing of the Serengeti. That title belongs to bats. Every November, approximately 10 million straw-coloured fruit bats, Eidolon helvum, Africa's largest bat species, with wingspans reaching 90 centimetres, pour into a single patch of swampy forest inside Zambia's Kasanka National Park. The park itself covers just 390 square kilometres, an almost absurdly small stage for what unfolds there. In terms of individual animals converging on one location, nothing else among land mammals comes close. When biomass is calculated, the sheer combined weight of living creatures packed into one place, Kasanka during peak migration surpasses every other documented mammal congregation on record. The bats travel from the Congo Basin, the Central African Republic, and other parts of equatorial and sub-equatorial Africa, drawn by the seasonal ripening of wild forest fruits. At dawn and dusk, the sky above the musuku trees darkens completely. The sound of millions of leathery wings is not merely loud. Observers consistently describe it as a physical sensation, a pressure in the air that you feel before you fully hear it. The ammonia from guano saturates the atmosphere for kilometers. Individual trees buckle under the weight of roosting animals. Branches snap. Crocodiles gather below. Martial eagles and other raptors command the airspace above, feeding almost continuously. What science cannot yet fully explain is perhaps the most compelling detail of all. The precise migration routes, the navigation mechanisms, and the specific reason Kasanka, rather than any other location, draws these animals remain incompletely understood. Ranked 7th in this series, the Kasanka bat migration earns that place not through rarity alone, but through sheer, measurable, overwhelming scale. A hospital with an X-ray machine, a ballroom, an ice rink, and a bowling alley, all of it built in the middle of one of the oldest and most hostile deserts on Earth. Kolmanskop, number 6 on our list, sounds like a fever dream, but it was real, it was thriving, and the desert swallowed it whole. The story begins with a diamond. In 1908, a railway worker named Zacharias Lawala picked up a stone near the tracks in German southwest Africa and realized what he was holding. Word spread almost instantly. German colonial authorities sealed off a radius of several kilometers, declared the area a restricted zone, and the rush began. Within years, a fully functional European town had risen from the Namib. Villas with wooden verandas and ornate plaster ceilings, a concert hall, a school, a skittle alley, and that hospital, equipped with X-ray technology that was considered a rarity even in major European cities at the time. An artificial ice rink in the Namibian desert. At its peak, during the first decade of the 20th century, Kolmanskop was producing close to a fifth of the world's entire diamond supply. The logic of boomtowns is always the same. When the resource moves, so do the people. After the First World War, yields declined. In the 1940s, richer deposits were discovered further south. The exodus was gradual, quiet, and total. By 1956, Kolmanskop was empty, and the Namib, which had been patient, stopped waiting. Sand began filtering through shutter cracks, banking up against doors, pressing on window glass from the outside. It had no urgency. It had time. Today, dunes have occupied the buildings with the ease of long-term tenants. In some rooms, the sand reaches the windowsill. In others, it fills the space up to the ceiling. Peeling paint, warped door frames, children's toys half buried in drifts. Not the wreckage of disaster, but the texture of slow, absolute erasure. What makes Kolmanskop visually unlike almost anything else on the continent is the collision of forms. The hard geometric lines of German colonial architecture pressed against the fluid curves of encroaching dunes. Pastel facades bleached under an African sky, European ornamental detail surrendering room by room to ochre sand. If a desert can bury an ice rink, a concert hall, and an entire town's ambition, methodically, without violence, simply by showing up every day, the question it leaves behind is an uncomfortable one. What exactly does permanence mean out here? There are places on Earth with a pH below 0, not in a laboratory flask, in open pools you could walk up to and photograph if the toxic gases rising from the surface didn't stop you first. Dalol hydrothermal field, sitting inside the Danakil Depression of northeastern Ethiopia, ranks 5th on our list, and that single chemical fact begins to explain why. The field lies nearly 50 meters below sea level, in a region that holds the record for the highest average annual temperature on Earth, consistently above 34 degrees Celsius. But the heat is almost secondary. What makes Dalol extraordinary is what happens when magma pushes to within a short distance of the surface, beneath a salt flat. Superheated water, saturated with sulfuric and hydrochloric acid, forces its way through fissures in the crust and erupts into terraces and pools of neon color: lemon yellow, caustic green, rust orange. The chemistry that produces those colors is the same chemistry that makes the air above them lethal. Chlorine, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide. The gas mixture hovering over Dalol is incompatible with vertebrate life. No plant germinates here, no animal lingers. For a long time, scientists classified Dalol as biologically dead, a rare absolute on a planet that tends to find a way. Then, extremophile microorganisms were discovered thriving in those hyperacid brines, organisms that don't merely tolerate the conditions but depend on them. That discovery shifted the conversation. Dalol is now studied as a planetary analogue, a reference point for evaluating whether environments on Mars or the icy moons of the outer solar system could support life. The visual reality of the place matches the science. Salt spires, crystalline crusts, bubbling acid pools, vapors that erase the horizon. Every vivid color signals danger rather than abundance. This is hostile beauty in its most literal form. Where Dalol kills through chemistry and heat, a landscape where the ground itself is the threat, our next entry kills differently. Not with acid, but with depth and human overconfidence. A bird that hasn't needed to evolve for 100 million years sits at number 4 on our list, and when you see one, you understand why evolution left it alone. The shoebill stork, Balaniceps rex, is a living argument that perfection doesn't require change. It stands up to 5 feet tall, spreads wings nearly 8 feet across, and carries a bill the size and shape of a Dutch wooden clog, roughly 8 inches wide and up to 9.5 inches long, the colour of old bone, tipped with a curved hook designed for one purpose: ending things. The reason this design endured is simple. It works. The shoebill inhabits the vast papyrus swamps of Central Africa, Uganda, Sudan, Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it hunts through absolute stillness. Ornithologists describe it as a living statue. It can stand motionless for hours at a stretch, barely blinking, while lungfish and water snakes move through the murky water below. Then the strike. The entire body pitches forward in a single explosive motion, and the bill snaps shut with a sound like a gunshot or a sharp clap. That acoustic signature, the bill clattering, doubles as a social signal between individuals. Prey includes lungfish, frogs, aquatic snakes, and, in documented cases, juvenile Nile crocodiles. The hooked tip allows the shoebill to behead its catch or simply pin it until movement stops. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is the eyes. Facing forward rather than to the sides, unusual in birds, typical of predators, they give the shoebill a face that reads as almost human, intensifying the impression that you're looking at something far older than a bird. The IUCN lists it as vulnerable. Estimates put the wild population at 5,000 to 8,000 individuals. One precise strike after hours of waiting. That's the shoebill's method. The next entry on our list operates on an entirely different scale. Not one strike, but millions of moving bodies, turning the sky itself dark. Number 3. An ant dies exactly where it was told to die. Not by instinct, not by accident, but because a fungus rewired its body and steered it there like a drone. That is not a metaphor. That is the documented reality of Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, a parasitic fungus found in the tropical rainforests of Central Africa, and it represents one of the most unsettling biological relationships on the planet. Here is why it works. The fungus does not need to be large or fearsome. Its mycelium infiltrates a carpenter ant through the chitinous exoskeleton, the outer shell, and spreads silently through the host's interior. Crucially, it does not destroy the brain. Instead, it releases a chemical cocktail that hijacks the neuromuscular system directly, overriding the ant's own motor control while keeping the insect alive throughout the process. The result is a creature that moves, climbs, and grips, but no longer for itself. The infected ant abandons its colony, ascends a plant stem to a height of roughly 25 centimeters, identifies a leaf where humidity and temperature meet the fungus's precise requirements, and locks its mandibles onto the central vein with a force it will never release. Then it dies. The fruiting body grows through the ant's head and releases spores downward, directly onto the forest floor trails where other ants travel. Colonies have evolved a behavioral countermeasure over millions of years of this arms race. Healthy workers detect and remove infected individuals, carrying them far from the nest in what amounts to an instinctive quarantine. On some leaves, clusters of desiccated, infected ants remain as evidence of outbreaks the colony survived. The image is stark and cinematic. A motionless insect locked to a green vein, a thin brown stalk piercing its skull. Dead and alive at once. If a fungus with no nervous system of its own can commandeer an entire organism from within, what can get inside the minds of creatures that actually think? That is exactly where our list goes next. More experienced divers have died here than beginners. That single fact tells you everything about what makes the blue hole of Dahab so dangerous. Number 2 on our list, Situated off the coast of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, the Blue Hole is an underwater sinkhole that drops vertically to depths exceeding 130 meters. From the surface, it looks like a perfect dark circle punched into the shallow turquoise lagoon, almost too symmetrical to be natural, almost too beautiful to be feared. Local Bedouins called it the Gate of Hell long before the diving industry arrived. They understood something that depth charts and certification cards don't capture. The mechanism of death is precise. At around 55 meters down, a tunnel cuts through the wall of the sinkhole, 26 meters long, connecting the hole to the open sea. Divers call it the Arch. Reaching it means descending far enough for nitrogen narcosis to take hold. Nitrogen narcosis occurs because dissolved nitrogen in the bloodstream behaves like a powerful intoxicant under high pressure. The sensation has been compared to severe alcohol intoxication, but with one crucial difference. You don't feel drunk, you feel fine. Better than fine, often euphoric. Critical thinking dissolves quietly. Depth perception warps. A diver stops noticing how fast they're sinking, miscalculates their air supply, and runs out of time before reaching the surface. The body stays below. Estimates place the death toll between 150 and 200 people, though no definitive count exists. Many bodies were never recovered. The permanent residents of the deep include technical divers, certified instructors, and competitive freediving champions, people who had trained for years and survived difficult dives before. Skill and experience offer no immunity once the brain stops working correctly. The site offers no visual warning. The water is extraordinarily clear. Coral formations cover the walls in layers of colour. It looks like the kind of place that ends up on travel posters, not memorial plaques. Yet those plaques are there, bolted into the rock at the water's edge, names and dates weathered by salt air. The Blue Hole kills through beauty and the silent erosion of judgment. The next location on our list operates by an entirely different logic. No seduction, no sudden disorientation, just a slow and methodical process that converts a living creature into a vehicle for its own survival, leaving the victim no capacity for conscious resistance at any stage. A cave that elephants carved with their tusks over thousands of years also happens to be one of the most dangerous places on Earth for a human being to breathe. That paradox is Kittim Cave, and it sits on the slopes of Mount Elgon, an extinct volcano rising to around 4,300 meters on the border of Kenya and Uganda. The cave itself extends roughly 200 meters into the volcanic rock, and its walls are saturated with mineral salts leached out by groundwater over geological time. Those salts are why elephants have been making the journey here for millennia, climbing steep trails in absolute darkness to gouge the walls with their tusks. The tusk marks are still there. So, very likely, is the virus. In 1980, a boy named Peter Carlton Gibbs, who lived near the mountain, fell ill after visiting Khartoum and died of Marburg hemorrhagic fever. 7 years later, in 1987, a Danish boy named Klaus Peter Merck visited the same cave and died of the same disease. American epidemiologists investigated both cases, and the events were later documented in scientific literature and long-form journalism. Teams searched the cave systematically, looking for the reservoir host, the animal species silently carrying Marburg without dying from it. Egyptian fruit bats, which inhabit Khartoum in large numbers, remain the strongest candidates, though that link has never been definitively confirmed. Marburg is a close relative of Ebola. In some outbreaks, it has killed up to 88% of those infected. The cave is also visited regularly by buffalo, leopards, and mongooses, making it one of the more concentrated intersections of wildlife and potential viral spillover on the continent. What makes Khartoum uniquely unsettling is not that it looks dangerous. It does not. It looks like a geological curiosity. a dark corridor of salt-stained rock where extraordinary animals have left their marks. The threat is invisible, suspended in air or carried in guano, waiting for the next host to wander in without understanding what the darkness holds. The cave remains open to visitors. Warnings exist. Number 1 on our list, and the kind of place that reminds you that the most lethal things rarely announce themselves. The next location on this list is different. The danger is entirely visible, the drop is right in front of you, and you choose to jump anyway. Africa will outlive us. That's not a metaphor or a dramatic flourish. It's the most accurate summary of everything this list has been building toward. 13 phenomena, and every single one of them shares a single quality. They exist at the precise boundary of what a human mind is willing to accept as normal. A tree that bleeds, a bird so still it becomes indistinguishable from a monument to death, a fungus that rewires a living creature's nervous system and pilots its body toward reproduction, a cave that stores viruses capable of collapsing entire populations without a single warning sign at the entrance. The reason these things feel wrong to us is the same reason they're so effective. Evolution in Africa never received the memo that things should be comfortable. While other ecosystems settled into equilibrium, Africa kept pushing. The continent sits on some of the oldest geological formations on Earth, has survived climatic shifts that wiped out complexity elsewhere, and has been running this experiment in unfiltered natural selection for longer than most habitats have existed. The acid pools of Dalol don't pause for visitors. The Goliath tigerfish didn't evolve empathy. Kittim Cave doesn't post warnings, because warnings are a human invention, and this place predates us entirely. Here's the paradox at the center of all 13 phenomena. Africa isn't dangerous because something went wrong. Africa is what happens when nothing interrupts the process. No safety nets, no decorative illusions built for the comfort of observers. Just 4 billion years of nature writing rules that have no human equivalent and no interest in our approval. If this list shifted something in how you think about this continent, leave that thought below. The next one is already waiting.